Alright boys, in this video tutorial I'm going to walk you through step by step what you need to do for this internal assessment about psychological theories being applied in different fields of psychology. It's quite convoluted and there's lots of different elements. A lot of psychology teachers just choose not to teach this unit because the assessment is so clunky. It's not difficult, it's just there's lots of different parts to it and it's kind of tricky to explain clearly, so I'm going to do my best. Now, by the end of this video, hopefully you'll know what you need to do for your internal, and essentially there are 4 parts to it. And the task sheet, everything is written out, explained here, and this video actually just copies and pastes most of what's written down here. But since you boys don't like to read, if I make a video on anything, you'll watch it. So I will put all the slides, including the link to this assessment video explanation, on Schoolbox. So you'll be able to find these slides with the hyperlinks available on Schoolbox. Right, so you have to examine how psychological theories are used in fields of psychological practice. All right. Now we've looked at sports psychology and educational psychology. They are our 2 fields. So there are 2 major components for each field. There's a test and there's a research paper. Okay, so that's why it's in 4 parts. There's a test and a research paper for sports psych, and there's a test and research paper for ed psych. That's 4 parts in total. So these are all the possible fields we could have chosen, and I went with sports and educational. Educational because it's all about theories of learning, which I think is pretty important. We learn about the psychology of learning and how to learn. And sports psych because you all play sports, because you have to, and it's mainly about motivation and performance. Next year in year 13, you'd look at clinical psychology when we focus on men's health. So let's look at ed psych to start with. All right, you're going to write an examination of how one theory of learning is applied by educational psychologists. Of course, it might help to study more. These are the theories that we've looked at. I recommend knowing 2 of these in very good detail. Of course, the more that you have, maybe the better, and I'll explain why that is when we look at the test. But you need to be able to know at least one of these theories, if not 2 or more. So, and the reason why you might want to know more is because for how the test is structured. Now, remember, psychologists can remember psychological theories, and they can use them to solve real-world problems. And that's the first part of this assessment. You're going to be given a scenario relevant to educational psychology or sports psychology, in this case, educational psych, and asked to apply your knowledge of one psychological theory to the problem. That's why it might be helpful to know 2 or 3, because then you can choose from your knowledge of theories the best one that fits that problem. All right, so the questions are going to be based on, do you know the role of the psychologist, an ed psychologist in this case, being able to explain a relevant theory in 100 to 200 words and explaining why it's relevant to the given scenario. And remember, so you don't know the scenario, all right? I'll show an example in a moment. And then can you come up with a strategy that might help address this problem, right? So you're being a real educational psychologist, all right? You're going to justify your use of the theory. And then, so the justification could be the fact that it's a very valid theory, it's supported by evidence, your strategy might be pretty ethical or practical, right? So it could be quick, cheap, easy. So you're looking at really practicality, ethicality, and validity. These are the 3 things that we juggle all the time in psychology, all right? And can you explain an implication of the theory? And I'm going to link some resources to how to do this in a moment. And can you explain how, in this case, educational psychology might change over time? So they're the 6 questions you need to be prepared for part A for the test. Remember, for the sports psych and ed psych, the test is exactly the same. The only thing that changes is the scenario. Of course, you're going to be given some sort of scenario about learning or a student in school for the ed psych test, and then you'll be given a scenario relevant to sports for the sports psych test. Okay, I don't know why these animations are here. Forgive those. So this is what it's going to look like, right? You have a brief scenario, okay, and then you answer the questions. Pretty straightforward. It'll be a closed book test, or you can just do it in pen and paper if exam.net gives you the heebie-jeebies. There is an exemplar that's linked here on the slides, available on Schoolbox. The exemplar is also posted on Schoolbox, and this gives you an idea of the types of answers you can write and the level of detail. Now, as always, I've written about a completely different field of psychology and completely different theories, development psych, so there's no point just trying to memorize these answers because that won't be a good idea. Now, if you're aiming for excellence, you need to be able to predict how educational psychology might change in the future, and I've got another separate video tutorial that goes over that and explains that in more detail. And you have to be able to explain an implication of the theory you've written about. There's some written examples of explanations of implications of theories, and there's a video tutorial as well. So these are additional resources that you need to consult if you're aiming for excellence. Now we get to part B, which is your ability to evaluate the theory based on research. So how we know anything in psychology is research, and the validity of a theory in psychology is based on its applications, is it useful, and the supporting evidence. So remember, the point of this assessment, like all psychology assessments, is looking at how good a psychologist are you. All right? And so good psychologists can look at pros and cons of theories and arguments, and then they can research using peer-reviewed and credible sources to come up with some evaluations. So to look at the strengths of the theory, you should do two of the following. You could look at a study and explain how that study supports the theory. So you're looking at that supporting evidence for the theory. You could look at a real-world example of the successful application of this theory and showing its benefits. You could find a quote from a peer-reviewed article that shows the validity of the theory. And then so you could two of these things. Okay, and we've been practicing this in class as well. Then we get to the limitations. Okay, so we look for the limitations. You could do this by showing some contradictory evidence. Is there a study that doesn't support the theory or highlights a weakness? Can you find a good quote from a peer-reviewed article, right? So from a knowledgeable psychologist, a credible source who questions the validity of the theory. Can you explain why the theory might not work in the real world? So this is your own thinking coming into play here. You could come up with a limitation. Can you find a way the theory's been applied and explain why that's a bad idea? You could look at where was the theory developed? Okay, so it could be in a Western culture, and explain why that might generalize to other cultures. Is there a cultural bias related to the theory? A theory needs to be falsifiable, meaning you can test it, right? Essentially meaning it's testable. Can you prove this theory wrong? Okay, and some theories, they're actually impossible to prove wrong because they're so abstract and they're not grounded in reality. So could you explain why your theory might not be falsifiable? You can't actually test to see if the claims are valid or not. Right, and so you're looking at about 400 to 500 words per theory. So what it looks like, this is the exemplar, this is in the wrong slide. This is the exemplar for the test section. Okay, so for the two questions about implications and the prediction for the future. And then this is an exemplar based on the research. Now I've actually done 3 points per, I've done 3 strengths and 2 limitations. Okay, so you can go for two to 3. You might want to go for a third if you feel like one of your points isn't so strong. A couple of points to notice here about this. I've embedded my quotes into my sentences, and we've been practicing how to do this in class as well. There are in-text citations, right, with the name of the author and the year in which it was published. The citations are hyperlinked to the original source, so I can check your referencing and make sure that you're using credible sources. And remember, this research paper, like all research papers, can be done at home, in your own time, written up by yourself, but it needs to be cited properly. And my sources, I've got some everyday Google, like Capital Choice Counseling for my example of it being, this theory being used in the real world, but the majority is coming from peer-reviewed journal articles because these are what we use in psychology. Really what we're doing here is we're relying on the work of psychologists who have spent their life's work reading and researching, and they know a lot about these theories, and we're trusting their guidance and judgment. All right, so this is the research and evaluation component of the internal. Okay, and the quality of your evaluation will dictate your mark. Okay, so if you simply, and I'm just pulling up the marking schedule here to make sure I get this right. Okay. If you attempt the research but it's not done very well and you've just kind of identified some strengths limitations, it's merit. So you at least have to attempt the evaluation to gain excellence. If you go into a lot of detail and you do a very thorough job of the evaluation, you can gain excellence because essentially it's not just if you attempt an evaluation or not, the quality of the evaluation will dictate merit or excellence. So then we get into sports psychology, and it's exactly the same format. It'll just be about a week later. All right, so you're not going to do both tests at the same time, both fields at the same time. They'll be separated by a period of time, so that way that gives you time to revise separately for each test. The structure of the test is exactly the same, and it will give you time to conduct your research and your write-up for the evaluation part. Again, the requirements are exactly the same. For the possible theories for sports psychology, we've covered the inverted U hypothesis, self-determination theory, operant conditioning, and we never got to the 4 C's this year in 2023, but there'll be information in the textbook available. And remember, all of the information on these theories is available in the textbooks that I've written for you and the resources I've created for you, and the Google Slides available all on Schoolbox. So again, to review for the sports psychology test, just ask yourself, do you know what a sports psychologist does? Do you know their job? Do you know one or ideally more theories of motivational performance used by sports psychologists? Do you know that theory well enough to apply it to a specific problem and use that theory to address a particular problem? Can you explain an implication of the theory? And can you predict how sports psychology might change in the future? Now, some questions on the formalities or the formats of how to submit things. For both tests, don't worry about how to submit these to Schoolbox. Okay, I'll download these and upload them, and if you do it by hand, I'll scan your work and upload it. For the research, for the evaluation part, there's no set template or framework for you to do. It's just start with a blank Word doc or a blank Google Doc. Right, you're old enough now, but I've given you the questions that you might want to answer. So if you want to copy and paste those questions and use those as a guide, that's fine. We've had some practice documents to go over, but you don't need to submit those. You're essentially just writing an evaluation of one theory of your choice. Now, just bear in mind, your evaluation doesn't necessarily have to be the same theory that you're going to use in the test, because you might not know what theory you're going to apply in the test. Okay, so you could be evaluating a different theory. The due date for the research is the same as the test for each field. So you'll need to submit to me the research component, and I will create an obvious place on Schoolbox for you to upload that work. So what this means for you is you've got 2 things to prepare for each field. So leading into the first part, the first field of educational psychology, you need to be revising the theories and preparing studying the implications and thinking about predictions for the test, alongside conducting the research and choosing one of those theories to evaluate. You'll have at least a week's of class time to do this, to prepare. Alrighty? So we see here that quickly the achievement criteria, a passable psychologist can basically summarize the theories and explain how and why they're used in the field. A very good psychologist can do that, plus they can justify why those theories are relevant, and they can identify some of the strengths and weaknesses of the theories. An excellent psychologist knows the theories, knows how to use them out there in the real world, in the field, education and sports. They can evaluate them thoroughly using peer-reviewed research and journal articles. They know the implications of the theory, and they can predict how those fields might change over time. There's a lot going on there, but it is worth 5 credits. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. Forgive me if you ask, sir, what do I do for the internal? And I say, go watch the video. If you've got to this point in the video and you're still not sure, then write down some questions and let me know. Okay, thank you, boys. Good luck.